Hi, my name is Chuck Borg. I'm with the Application Demonstration Services Group with the Siebel build team. In this tutorial, we're going to discuss the new Business Rules Authoring tool within Siebel 8.0. This tool is from a company called Haley and is packaged in with the Siebel Tools install as an optional plugin. The authoring tool offers an easy and effective way of managing changing business needs or maybe imposed standards. There may be a need to change from time to time credit card application information or insurance application requirements, that sort of thing. But really what we're going to do in this video is walk through a very simple example of how the authoring tool and the Siebel application interact with each other, importing Siebel object data into the authority tool, authoring the creation of a rule, and deploying that back into the Siebel application will be used at runtime against the business flow. There is other documentation and training material that are available for in-depth architecture and functionality between these two. So why don't we go through the steps to create a simple validation from the Siebel application, where when we're creating a new account, it expects certain fields to be filled out. So in this case, what we'll do is an account, the site field will be expected to be filled in when you create a new account. So that's what we'll build, and if it's not there, it'll ask you to fill in that field. Now this particular example is very simple to do in other ways within Siebel without the Haley authorization tool. However, this offers a different mechanism that could make it easier, flexible from a deployment standpoint. Now obviously this rules engine is much more powerful than the simple validation that we're going to do here, but it gives you a starting point that will allow you to connect with the Siebel application and build more robust rules, and that you can call workflows and business services and everything, which should also reduce the amount of scripting required or that could be used in building up business logic. So why don't we open up the Business Rules developer, and you'll find it under Siebel Other Apps, Tools, Business Rules Developer. And it first asks you whether you want to open up an existing knowledge base or create a new one. We're going to start right from scratch, create a new knowledge base that we can do validation against Siebel creating a new account. It initially just brings up a browser for you to decide where you want to create and place your new knowledge base. So typically we'll put it under Tools, Rule Knowledge Base. You may find there's one that exists out of the box that's there. We create a new one in here, one place to put it, but you can put them anywhere you want really. So let's call it account. We can call it anything you want really. Validation or validate. Good enough. And it opens us up to a blank knowledge base. Now the first thing that we're going to need to do is to import objects from Siebel that we're going to use to create the rules against. So we can bring in some business component field information now. If we need to add more, you can always pull in more later. So let's, for instance, say, so the first step we'll do is we'll say import Siebel object, and we will sort of run through the database that we need to connect to, the Siebel database that we need to connect to do that. So the first one is, it says the repository database, so it knows what objects exist in the data model. And we have, so what we want to do is we can use a configuration file. So use the client. It's usually the best. You can use, in this case, we'll use UAgent for the call center application. You could call another config file that uses a different application. But that's fine if you use fins or public sector. Doesn't really matter too much. We'll log in as admin. These will be blank the first time that you run it, but I've run through this already and it actually saves this information. We're going to use the sample database. Alright. And or you can use the SQL Server data source as well, if you like. And so in this case, for the repository database, it will make sure that it can connect to the database. And after a brief time, it will come up with the next screen in the wizard to ask you to what runtime database that you want to connect to. So you might have, I guess the difference between, setting things up at the developer database and then connecting to the runtime database as the production database, and deploying it there. Now in this case, so it is, it's probably easier to use, but definitely use the same database. It's probably easier just to use the client. So even if you're using the SQL Server, the server data source as it's called, usually just connect here as local. When we're doing this, you don't need to have any of the Siebel server running. You don't need to run demo launcher. You don't need to do any of that setup. As long as you have the database running, in this case, if we're using sample, you don't need to. If you're using SQL Server, make sure you have it started. Use them, and we'll be using the Windows client in Siebel. So just leave it at local. All right. We'll connect to the same configuration file, same login, same data source, sample. In this case, we'll use sample, and we'll let that connect in. And after a moment, it may prompt you. It probably will the first time prompt you for this message, saying that there is already data that has been set up against the runtime or production database using a different knowledge base. So it can only actually have one imported at a time. You can save multiple knowledge bases and re-import the one that you had prior, or add new information in the same knowledge base, but this one is saying, okay, I already have one, do you want to overwrite it with your new one? So in this case, we're going to say yes. And we'll let that continue connecting. So if you had anything in the rules administration screen in the Siebel application, that will be removed, which it's doing now, and then it will prepare for the objects that we select to have imported. Now after a moment, it will come up the next screen in the wizard to prompt us to see if we want to import the entire model or to import specific objects, of course, which is what we want to do. Right? So typically you'll leave it at import Siebel objects, select next, and then it'll ask you what business object. So we have to select a business object and the business components that we want within that. So what we're going to do is we want to validate against accounts, right? So we're going to select the account object, and within that it will determine the business components that are available within that the account business object. We'll select accounts, and then the next screen will allow us to decide what fields that we want to bring in from accounts, so that we can build rules against. So easily we could select everything if we wanted to. In this case, we're going to keep it very simple. So we know that I said we're going to validate against the account itself, the fact that the name, the site field would be filled in. In this case, it's actually called the location. So we'll go down to the location field, add that, and we're going to add the name. So we create account against account name. Where is it? Up here, a little bit up. We're going to validate and make sure that there is an appropriate location. Right, shows us the hierarchy, and then it says it was able to import those objects. Do we want to perform another task? No. It gives us an output of information. Basically just says everything's okay. And now we end up with this information sort of behind the scenes. So this looks exactly as it did before we even ran the import. What we can do is you can have a look. We can go into the concepts tab here, and if we just look down into the entity, look at the account. The account showed up and it offers phrasings that it's already given. Here it says for an account that has a location and an account that has a name. So it brought in both location and name. We can verify that just by looking here, part of that. So, but what we're going to do is we're just going to create a new module and statement that says exactly what it is that we want to do. So first, let's add a module, and this is, we can give it any name that we want, really, and this will actually, you'll see how this shows up in the Siebel application. So account must have a location. Just call it straight as it is. And we will write a statement against that, add a statement. And here it says, now this is where it offers you the specific syntax that you need to create the statement. So what I want to do is, I want to say, if an account doesn't have a location that we're going to create, then, send a message, right, that we do need one. So we say if, right, and then I do a space, and then it offers available proper words for the syntax. So if I can type in sort of what I want, but if it's not correct, for instance, if I do this, see, it's not highlighted, so I know that it's not, and it doesn't show up in this words section down in the lower right. So I know that that's not working. So I said, okay, I have available to me accounts. I want to, if an account's location, right, is, and then we can see what it right, in this case unknown works for us, right? If we don't know what the account location is, right, we can select that, then we'll raise, and error is the only choice that we have. Let's raise an error that we want as, and from this point on we can give it the actual phrase that we want to show up. So please enter site. And then once we finish putting the quotes around it, everything is bolded, which means that our syntax of our phrase is correct. That's just a simple example. Now I also want to make sure that this only occurs if, right, only if there isn't one. So we have to add this one more short statement as well. So only if an account does, see that's a word that we can use, not have, and it gives me exact words that I have available to me, a location. That way, if I then put in the location information afterwards, then it will pass this rule. Okay, so that's the very simplistic validation that we've created. Now what we can do is we can actually deploy that. We're going to bring it into the Siebel application and say, okay, here's the rule that I want you to run against, right? And we'll import this rule into Siebel. We do Siebel deployment at this point, right? We'll have to set it up so that it will be triggered and invoked each time that you try to create a new account record. And we'll show that afterwards. So here, this is the module that we're going to bring in. An account must have a location. You can do many of them together, many rules. You can build many rules and then import them all if you like. So we're just going to run this. This is going to take a moment. Okay, and when that is done, the deployment window just goes away, and that has completed importing into Siebel application. So let's log into call center and complete the setup. Okay. Now we'll move over to the business rules administration and complete the publishing and activation of that. Similar to the workflows, actually, when workflows are published and available within the Siebel application, then you need to activate those. Some different steps here as well, though. But so let's go into the business rules module list, and have a look at our imported module that we created, which was called the account must have a location. Now a couple of steps we have to do here. You notice that right now it's inactive, and if I look at the applet below under rule module relations, the new button is grayed out, so it's not in a state yet where we can do really much with that. So there is a couple of steps that we got to take. So when this module comes in, we need to make an association with the business object. So let's do that for account, and as soon as I tab out of that and save that information, then the new button in the lower applet for the module relations will become accessible. And we have to create a couple of new rows in there. So we will go and create a new record. And now we'll pick in this case there is one record available to us. There could be more, depending on the rules that you import. And so now once we've got that relationship created, now we can activate this module. Now it becomes active. If we want to revise it, we can always go in here and say reconfigure module, or you can deactivate the module and leave it deactivated. And so now we've activated it. We'll just do a reload here, just kind of like doing a reload of runtime events, which in fact is our next step. So now that we've got our rule imported and activated, that's going to be run. Now we got to have a way to trigger it. So we're going to use runtime event to do that in this case, because it's, from the validation standpoint, it's simple. We know that when we create a new account, we want to have that invoked. So it's fairly simple to do that from a runtime event. So we will go into runtime events administration, and we will go into action sets first, actually. Right. And we will, let's create a new one. Here, let's call it account location. Right. It's active by default. And we will create a new record in the second applet, biz serve. Make this a action type business service, sequence 1, and then lower down business rules service run rules, and then the business service context needs to be the name of the rule that we created. I also need to take that out. Okay, so we have to populate this business service context. So let's go back here for a second. Copy this, because we need to have this exactly the same. Should be able to go back. Let's see it there. It's here, back to our action set. Paste that in. Okay, so now we've got our action set created. Now we'll go create an event against it. New sequence of running against a business component, because we're actually running against the account object, which is exactly this account. The event is a write record new, so we only want to do it when we create new records in this particular case. No sub event, and the action set name will be, we called it account location. Okay, should be active. Let's reload runtime events. Now that's all the steps that we need to do to invoke the rule for the validation that we're going to do against accounts. So why don't we go straight there and see what results that we get. So we can create a new account even just from this add here. Right? So if I create a new account, let's just call it Oracle, straightforward. Now the location is really the site. This is the field that we wanted to make sure that we added. So if we say add and go, we actually get the message that we requested showing up here. It said please enter site. Right? So I can do that, Oracle Canada. Right? And it should add that for me. put it in here. We can also do it, if we do it from here, we see an actual pop-up window of the same thing. So I can create new from here and say Oracle, right, and try to save it. And in this case, I get a pop-up message, please enter site. Now, just in case, what you might find, there's a parameter where it might come up, if you ever see it, where you put in a message like this, but it shows up more of an error than a notice like this, where it says executing, the must-have, the location rule module raised the following error, and say, then it says please enter site. So it's a little bit more cryptic, even though the right information is in there. Now that can be suppressed by a system preference within the application administration, and I'll show you that. Why don't I just put this in here, HQ, right, and then save it, and it allows me to save it now. So that was our simple validation that we created, and I'll show you where that is laid out as far as the that system preference, application, system preferences, we'll query on suppress biz rule error code. You can set it to true. So if you have that funny error looking message and yours happens to be set to false, you can set this to true and it'll change that value for you. And there's a similar one to scripting error code that should be set to true already, and that can be turned off if you wish, but either way, just to show you where those live. So that pretty much completes the tutorial on the business rules engine that's new for Siebel 8.0. And again, there is much more material that you can get through training and documentation that has a lot of detailed information on, and discussing the robustness of the types of rules that you can build, and using it to augment and replacing scripting techniques. Okay. Thank you very much.